My son and his wife left me standing at the airport with not a single dollar in my pocket. What they didn't know was that I was on my way to meet a lawyer. Just as we were about to part ways, my daughter-in-law turned and said with a shrug, "You know what, Mom? We only got you a one-way ticket. You'll figure out the rest." She said it like it was no big deal, pulling her fancy suitcase behind her and strolling into the first-class line without even glancing back. She smiled, that kind of smug, polite smile people wear when they think they're doing you a favor by being honest. Then she added, "You've got a phone. Call someone. Or sell it. That'll cover a Greyhound, right?" And just like that they were gone. Through security into the tunnel of gates and vacation photos, disappearing with what little respect they still had for me. I stood there alone in the middle of Memphis International Airport, clutching my purse tight against my chest. No suitcase, no return ticket, not even a boarding pass. Just a light sweater over my shoulders and a printed itinerary I now realized was nothing more than a prop. The whole thing had been planned, me getting left behind. I was never really part of that trip. All around me the airport buzzed with life. Boarding calls echoed through the speakers, suitcase wheels clicked across tile floors, and bursts of laughter rose from conversations I couldn't quite make sense of. I stood there like a statue while the world kept moving. A few people glanced my way, then quickly looked away again. One woman gave me a polite smile, but it turned to pity the moment she noticed I didn't have any bags. And right then I wanted to vanish. Just that morning I'd woken up thinking I was part of something. A family getaway they called it. A little healing trip after the funeral. My husband, God rest his soul, had passed just 2 months ago. We were married 42 years. Buried him on a rainy Monday. They told me I needed to get out, breathe some fresh air, stop crying so much. They said this trip would do me good. So I went. I even sold the last string of pearls he gave me to help cover the plane tickets. It's a group effort, they said. Everyone's pitching in. But I never saw receipts. Never saw a return flight confirmation. And I never asked because I was raised to trust family, even when they stopped treating you like one of their own. At check-in, I noticed Marissa's mother had a priority tag on her suitcase. My son, Derek, had a first-class ticket. So did Marissa. I figured they just booked us separately for convenience. Marissa even said they'd check on me once we were in the air. But that was before the airline clerk scanned my boarding pass and told me it had already been voided. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said with a tight smile, her brows creased in that way people look when they hope you won't cry. "It shows here there's no return trip under your name." I smiled politely, still hopeful. Maybe it was a mistake. But when I turned around they were already heading towards security. I followed, still holding my little folder of travel documents like maybe showing them would fix everything. That's when Marissa turned, let out a sigh like she'd been rehearsing it and repeated those words. "You know what, Mom? We only bought you a one-way ticket. You'll figure it out." She said it like she was reading off a weather report. And when she added that bit about selling my phone for bus fare, Derek didn't say a word. Didn't even look at me. Just adjusted his sunglasses and kept walking. They left me there like some used napkin. Tossed, forgotten, no longer needed. I stood for a long time after they disappeared behind security. Too shocked to move. Too proud to sit. I didn't cry, not then. I just kept breathing one shallow breath at a time. The last time I felt that kind of abandonment I was 9 years old, waiting for a father who never came back from a trip to the next town over. And now here I was again, full circle. Only this time I had raced the person who walked away. People rushed past me like nothing had happened. A man with a baby stroller, a loud group of teenagers in matching dance team jackets, and somewhere nearby, a flight to Orlando was making its final boarding call. The sunlight hitting the glass walls stung my eyes. I looked down at my phone, not because I expected Derek to text me, but just to make sure it was still there. It was the only thing I had left that made me feel like I still existed. I thought about calling someone. But who? My sister passed years ago. My friends all had their own grown kids, their own heartaches. I wasn't about to call anyone just to say, "Hey, my son left me at the airport." No, I wasn't handing anyone my humiliation. Instead, I took a slow breath, walked over to the nearest bench and sat down with my back straight and my chin high. I may not have had a way home, but I had something better. Tucked inside my bra, right near my heart, was a small envelope. Inside it was a business card, from a lawyer my husband once trusted. An old friend named Carl. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but I remembered his words clearly. "If you ever need anything, Linda, you come find me." Well, now I needed something. And I wasn't going to sit around waiting to be rescued. Because maybe I had been left with nothing, but that didn't mean I had nothing left to do. Grief doesn't knock before it comes in. It doesn't ask for permission. It just blows through the front door and settles in like it owns the place. That's exactly how it felt when Jake died. Not sudden, but total. One minute he was in the kitchen humming off key and asking me where I'd stashed the cinnamon, and the next he was collapsed in the hallway, coffee still warm in his hand. The doctors called it a massive stroke. No chance of recovery. Final. Just like that. We'd been married for 42 years. 42 years of habits and shared rhythms, of arguments that ended in soft apologies, of glances across crowded rooms that spoke louder than words ever could. We'd raised a son. We'd lost a pregnancy and tried again. We built a life that showed up in the creases beside our eyes when we laughed. He died on a Tuesday morning. It rained that day, not the kind of rain that chases you indoors, but the slow kind that soaks into your bones before you notice you're drenched. I stood at the kitchen sink for hours after they took him, staring out the window, watching rain roll down the glass like it was searching for a way back home. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just listened to the quiet, a kind of quiet that felt heavier than anything I'd ever known. The days after blurred together. Casseroles, condolences, and faces I hadn't seen in years showing up with flowers and stories I barely heard. The funeral was short, just like he would have wanted. Tom never liked attention. He used to joke, "If anyone cries at my funeral, hand him a mop." I tried to keep it together, but I still brought tissues just in case. After the service, I came home alone to the house we'd built brick by brick. The bed felt enormous without him. The walls echoed in a new way. His slippers sat untouched under the nightstand. His toothbrush was still beside mine, like grief was just a guest passing through, not a thief that had stolen everything and left the door open behind it. The weeks crawled by. Some days I never made it past the porch. I'd sit in his favorite chair and try to summon the sound of his laugh, that deep, shoulder-shaking chuckle he made when something really tickled him. I tried to picture the way his eyes lit up when I walked into a room. I tried to remember who I was before I became the widow. Then one morning, Derek showed up. He gave me one of those distracted hugs, the kind that barely touch your ribs, and said, "Mom, Marissa and I were talking. We think maybe you should get away for a bit." "Get away?" Echoed confused. "Yeah, just a short trip," he said. "Clear your head a little. We're thinking of taking the kids to Florida for spring break. You should come. It might do you good." Marissa stood beside him, nodding along with a rehearsed look of sympathy. "Just a change of scenery," she said gently. "Don't you think Tom would want that for you?" And for the first time in weeks, it felt like someone had opened a window. I hadn't left Kentucky in over 5 years. The thought of feeling warm sand between my toes, the sun on my shoulders, waking up to the sound of voices instead of silence, it stirred something I thought had gone completely cold. "Are you sure?" I asked, still half expecting them to change their minds. "Of course," Marissa said with a smile. "Your family." Family. I held on to that word like it was a life preserver. Later that week I opened the old jewelry box I hadn't touched since the funeral. In the corner was the gold band Tom had given me on our 10th anniversary. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. He'd saved for months, then slipped it onto my finger one quiet Tuesday morning with a whisper, 10 more years, and 10 more after that. I wore that ring every day until the day he passed. Now I held it in my hand and felt its weight, its warmth, and then I let it go. I walked to the little pawn shop a few blocks away and placed it on the counter. "You sure about this, ma'am?" the man asked, looking at me with wide eyes. "I'm sure," I said, even as my throat clenched so tight it nearly sealed shut. I used the money to chip in for the trip. When Marissa said everyone was contributing, I assumed that meant me too. So I gave what I could. It felt good to be part of something again, to be included, to feel like I still mattered, not just a framed photo on the wall. That night I cried alone in my bedroom. Not only for Tom, but because, for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something close to hope again. I packed my suitcase with care. I tucked a small framed photo of Tom into the side pocket of my carry-on. I picked my softest sweater, the one he always said made me look classy as hell. I folded an old beach towel I hadn't used in years, and slid a paperback I'd been meaning to read for months into the front pouch. Before zipping it all up, I tucked a tissue into the top flap. Just in case. I didn't know that by the time I reached the airport, all of it, the towel, the suitcase, the hope, would be gone. That the version of me who zipped up that bag would never make it past gate B22. I hadn't been invited out of love or grief or even kindness. I'd been invited out of convenience, for what I could offer, not for who I was. I see that now. But back then, in those quiet days between the funeral and the flight, I believed them. I believed I was still part of the family. That I was wanted. I was wrong. There's a particular kind of silence that settles in when you realize you weren't simply overlooked. You weren't forgotten. No, this is something else. This is knowing someone looked you over, thought it through, and decided you were disposable. It happened at the ticket counter. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the agent said, gently tapping at her keyboard. "I'm not seeing a return flight under your name." I blinked, confused. "I'm traveling with my son's family. Last name's Bishop. The reservation should be under Bishop." She searched again, her frown deepening. "I do see a Bishop group, but the return flights are only for 6 passengers. You're not listed," the ticket agent said, glancing up at me with that practiced expression they must train for, polite concern mixed with a hint of impatience, like she knew my heart was breaking but also had 10 people waiting behind me. I felt a tightness in my chest, like all the air had vanished. "There must be a mistake," I whispered. She offered to check for a return flight, but said it would need to be purchased separately. I didn't respond. I just turned away slowly and scanned the noisy terminal until I spotted Derek and Marissa standing near a coffee stand, laughing at something on her phone like nothing had happened. Clutching my crumpled itinerary, now damp from the sweat on my palms, I walked over to them. "Derek," I said gently, "the gate agent says I don't have a return ticket. Can you check yours?" He looked up, and for a split second I saw guilt in his eyes before he covered it with a nervous smile. "Oh, right," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, we figured maybe you'd want to stay longer. Enjoy some peace and quiet." My heart froze. "What?" Marissa didn't even pretend. She sipped her coffee and said flatly, "We only bought you a one-way, Linda. Flights aren't cheap, and come on, you're retired. You've got time." I stared at her, voice shaking. "I thought this was round trip." She shrugged like it didn't matter. "You're a grown woman. You can figure it out. There's Wi-Fi. Use your phone. Call someone. This is a vacation, not a charity." I turned to Derek, searching his face for anything. Sympathy, shame, a flicker of doubt, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "We just thought it'd be nice for you to stay a little longer, maybe see some old friends." "But I didn't pack for more days," I said, stunned. Marissa looked at her nails and said, "There are stores." I couldn't find the words. I just stood there holding that itinerary like it could protect me, realizing suddenly, I didn't even have my bag. They had checked their luggage together at the curb. Marissa had waved me off when I tried to bring my carry-on. "Let us handle it, Linda," she said. "Just relax." My suitcase was probably still in the trunk. They hadn't just stranded me without a flight, they had taken my luggage too. "Where's my bag?" finally asked. Derek looked to Marissa. She glanced back, then said, "It's with ours. We can get it back to you later, if you're staying." I blinked. "So I don't have a flight, I don't have my clothes, and you didn't think I should know that before we got to the airport?" "You're overreacting," Marissa replied, her tone flat. "You said you wanted to be included. Well, this is how we do things. Flexibility." Derek nodded like that explained everything. "We didn't mean anything by it, Mom. You've just been emotional since Dad passed. We thought this would be easier." "Easier for who?" I asked. They didn't answer. Marissa zipped her designer bag and stood up. "We've got to get to security. Our group's about to board." And that was it. They walked away. No hug, no apology, no acknowledgement that they had reduced me to an afterthought holding a useless boarding pass. I watched them stroll toward Tisa, Marissa's heels clicking like a metronome, Derek carrying nothing but his sleek carry-on, his face blank. For a moment, it felt like the ground was crumbling beneath me, like I was sinking into a kind of loneliness no one warns you about. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but from being tossed aside by the very people who are supposed to love you the most. A woman with a stroller bumped gently into me and apologized. I nodded but couldn't speak. My hands were trembling. I backed out of the flow of travelers and sat down on a bench against the wall. I didn't cry. I was too far past that. Instead, I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, not to call them, not to call anyone in the family, but to open my notes app. I typed one sentence. This will be the last time I trust them. Then I scrolled to a contact I had saved under junior lawyer. His real name was Caleb, and Jake had introduced us years ago when he was still working. Caleb handled our mortgage, our wills. He was young back then but sharp. He once said to me, "If you ever need anything, Linda, I'll be there." I hit the call button. When he answered, I didn't say hello. I didn't give context. I just said, "I need to update my will." And in that moment I felt something shift. I was no longer the abandoned mother holding a one-way ticket. I was a woman taking back her voice. I looked up at the monitor. Their flight was on time. So was mine. It just wasn't going where they thought. I didn't follow them to the gate. I stayed on that bench long after their flight disappeared from the board. Long after the final boarding call echoed through the terminal. No texts came. I didn't expect one. By now, Derek and Marissa were likely already sipping orange juice in their roomy first-class seats, posting pictures with captions about family time and recharging. But I wasn't part of that caption. Not anymore. I reached into the side pocket of my purse. Past the tissues, the peppermint candies, the travel-size lotion. My fingers brushed something familiar. An envelope. Jake and I started tucking cash into that envelope 6 years ago, after his heart scare. We called it our break glass in case of emergency fund. A few hundred at first. Then a little more over time. A $50 bill here, a $20 there. $100 now and then after tax returns. That envelope wasn't meant for groceries or birthday gifts. Jake and I set it aside for the day one of us had nowhere else to turn and needed to act fast. I opened it with shaking fingers. $960 in crisp bills straight from the bank. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. And more importantly, it was enough. Outside the airport, I waved down a cab and gave the driver an address I hadn't said out loud in years. 287 Jefferson Street, the office of Walker and Pierce Law. He nodded and merged into traffic. The cab smelled faintly of pine-scented air freshener and fried chicken. I stared out the window as the old streets rolled by, strip malls, gas stations, and the cracked sidewalks of central Kentucky, the same city I'd called home for most of my adult life. The last time I'd been to that office, Jake had just retired. We went together to draft our first will. Back then, everything was simple. Everything went to each other and then to Derek. We were so sure of our choices, so sure of our son. But now the only thing I was sure of was that the person named on that will no longer deserved what it promised. Caleb, Jake always called him Junior back then, was still there. A little older now, a bit slower on his feet, but his handshake still had weight. "Linda," he said, brows lifting with surprise. "It's been a long time. I was real sorry to hear about Jake." "Thank you," I said softly, easing into the chair across from him. "I'm here because I need to change my will." His eyebrow rose. "All right. Anything specific?" I nodded firmly. "I want my son and daughter-in-law removed from every part of it." He paused for a second. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He didn't ask why. He had known Jake well enough to know that I didn't make choices like that lightly. He just opened a folder, clicked his pen and waited. "I'd also like to add a new beneficiary," I said. "An organization. One that helps older people who've been mistreated by their families." He looked up from his notes. "That's very specific." "I've become very specific," I replied. He gave a small nod. "We can absolutely do that. I'll need their contact information." "I've got it right here." I pulled a folded pamphlet from my purse, something I'd grabbed months ago at the community center, never imagining I'd be using it for myself. As he copied the information down, I leaned in a little closer. "And while we're at it, I want to know if there's anything I can do legally about what happened. Being left behind. Taken advantage of." "You're talking about financial exploitation?" he asked, more serious now. "Yes." "Elder abuse." I said the words plainly. "There are protections," he said. "Especially if you were misled or financially pressured as a vulnerable adult." "Did they access your accounts?" "No," I answered. "But I gave them money under false pretenses. They made me believe I was part of something I wasn't." He nodded slowly. "We can absolutely pursue that. At the very least, I can make sure they never touch another cent of what belongs to you." "Good," I said. "Because I want this updated will notarized today, and I want it sent to a third-party executor. I don't want anyone in my family managing anything of mine ever again." You got it, he said, already typing. For the next hour we went through the old documents line by line. We tore down everything Jake and I had once planned, not out of bitterness but out of clarity. When I walked out of that office I didn't feel small. I didn't feel bitter. I felt clean. I hailed another cab and gave the driver the name of a modest motel downtown. Nothing fancy. Just a place to rest, to think, to remember that being left without a return ticket doesn't mean you're lost. Sometimes, it means you've finally chosen your own direction. By the time morning light spilled through those thin curtains, everything was official. Derek and Marissa were no longer named in my will. Their names, once written in bold ink under primary beneficiaries, had been erased. Not out of rage, not out of revenge, but something far stronger: intention. I didn't make the changes in a whirlwind. I did it slowly, carefully, deliberately. Some decisions aren't born in storms, they're made in silence. When you've finally accepted that the rain isn't going to pass. The night before, after leaving Caleb's office, I sat on the motel bed with the documents spread across the blanket. Page after page of legal clauses, asset lists, signature lines. My whole life laid out in columns and figures. But for the first time in years, it was mine again. It wasn't a massive estate, nothing anyone would chase headlines over. But it was what we built. There was the house Jake and I spent 30 years paying off. The patch of farmland my daddy left me, which we'd been leasing quietly for grazing. A couple investment accounts we'd grown with care, like tending tomatoes in a backyard plot. And the separate savings account Jake had always insisted I keep, just in case. The case had come. And now it had purpose. I left it all to a nonprofit called Elder Haven, an organization that helps older adults who've been abandoned or taken advantage of by their families. They offer housing help, legal defense, community resources. They support women like me. And I knew I wasn't the only one. I included a personal letter in the bequest. Not addressed to anyone in particular, but written for every woman who might one day find herself sitting where I had sat. Left behind, dismissed, treated like a burden instead of a blessing. If you're reading this, I wrote in the letter, I want you to know, you are not invisible. You are not crazy. And most of all, you are not done yet. That morning, before I checked out of the motel, I called Caleb one last time. I want a digital copy, I told him. Scanned and password protected. Sent only to the email I'm about to give you. Do not share it with anyone. Not even if they ask. He didn't question me. Understood, he said. And one more thing, I added. I want the originals locked in your office. Fireproof storage. Only you and the executor you appoint should have access. You got it, Linda, he said. And if anyone from my family contacts you, I'll remind them, he interrupted gently, that they were removed by your own signature. I exhaled. It was done. The chain had been cut. Not in anger, not in spite, but in peace. In quiet freedom. It's a strange thing, erasing your own child from the future you once dreamed for them. But the truth is, they never earned what they tried to buy with manipulation and disrespect. Inheritance isn't just about assets. It's about trust. And once trust is broken, like mine had been, it can't be restored with flowers or phone calls. It must be earned. And they hadn't even tried. That afternoon, I mailed copies of the revised documents, not to Derek or Marissa, but to a brand new safety deposit box opened in my name alone. I listed myself as the only key holder. I updated all my account passwords. I changed every emergency contact form that still listed Derek. When the bank teller asked, "Would you like to add a family member for access?" I smiled. "No," I said. "Just you. Just me." Those two words once felt lonely. But now they felt like power. Like protection. Like starting over. Not as someone's mother, someone's widow, someone's quiet shadow, but as a woman writing her own story again. On the way back to the motel to grab my things, I passed a park. Kids were climbing jungle gyms, shrieking with joy. I paused on a bench, let the sun warm my face, and remembered something Jake used to say: not everything you plant will grow. But what does? That's yours. That's your legacy. I had planted enough. Now it was time to grow something new. I returned to the house one final time. Not to make a scene, not to deliver speeches, and not even to say goodbye. I came only to take what was mine. I scheduled the moving truck for a Tuesday morning, midweek, when I knew Derek and Marissa would both be at work. I didn't want to see them. I didn't want another round of fake concern or late apologies. I wanted peace. I wanted silence. The house looked smaller when I returned. Or maybe I had simply outgrown it. The shutters were peeling. The front steps sagged a little. The old wind chimes Jake had hung still tinkled in the breeze, but they didn't make me smile anymore. Nothing in that house did. The spare key was still where we always kept it, hidden in the planter by the porch just for emergencies. And this, I figured, qualified. The movers were kind, efficient, and discreet. I hired them from a different county. I didn't want the neighbors whispering. I'm just taking a few things, I told them. Jake's favorite chair, the one that had molded to his back after years of reading. A single box of books. Our wedding album. His old navy cap. My mother's quilt. That was it. Not the furniture we picked together. Not the dishes that held Sunday roasts. Not the mattress we replaced after 30 years because he said I deserved better. Just the pieces that still held truth. I walked slowly through the rooms. The kitchen where I had baked every birthday cake. The living room where we danced barefoot on our anniversary, tipsy and laughing. The hallway where Jake had collapsed, his coffee still steaming. I didn't cry. I'd cried enough. I left the keys in a sealed envelope on the kitchen counter with a short note. Don't call. Don't ask. I am exactly where I want to be. And then I walked out. The drive to my new place was under 2 hours, but it felt like crossing into a different lifetime. The sign out front read, Willow Grove, independent living for seniors with dignity. I had toured it once quietly years ago with Jake. He wanted us to have options, though I'd insisted I'd never leave our home. Maybe one day, he'd said with a grin. If they've got good pudding. Well, Willow Grove had more than pudding. Sunlight poured through wide windows. The air smelled like lemons, not bleach. Soft jazz played in the lounge. And when you walked in, people looked at you, not past you. Welcome, Mrs. Bennett, the woman at the front desk said warmly. We've been expecting you. It was the first time in months I'd heard someone say my name like it mattered. They led me to a cozy corner apartment with a view of the courtyard. My boxes were already inside. My chair had been placed by the window. On the table sat a welcome basket, jam, crackers, and a handwritten note from the director. Thank you for helping us make this place possible. Now it's yours too. Because what they didn't know, what Derek and Marissa would never know, was that Willow Grove had been partly funded by the donation I made through Elder Haven. My estate wasn't just a collection of papers or numbers. It was a quiet revolution. I had created a place in this world where I would never again be overlooked. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't a shadow of who I used to be. I was just Linda, nothing less, nothing more. And that was enough. In the days that followed my move, I began to settle into my new life. I joined the afternoon book circle. I met a retired schoolteacher named Helen, who made me laugh so hard I spilled coffee right down the front of my blouse. I started attending watercolor class every Thursday. I even volunteered to lead a letter writing workshop, something Jake and I used to do together every Sunday afternoon. The best part? Every evening at 5 o'clock someone knocked on my door just to say, dinner's ready. Not because they needed anything, just because they wanted me there. There was always a seat waiting. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I took my place at the table without hesitation. I wasn't in the way. I wasn't being tolerated. I was welcome. That old house I left behind, it wasn't home anymore. Because home isn't where your stuff lives. It's where you are wanted. And here I was finally home. 6 months passed. 6 months of peace. 6 months of morning coffee in the Willow Grove sunroom. 6 months of sketching little birds in watercolor, of hearing my name spoken kindly, never followed by a sigh. 6 months of not looking back. Then the day came. The one I had circled in red on the little calendar pinned inside my armoire. That morning, Caleb sent me an email with just one line. Letters have been delivered. As of 9 a.m. it's done. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. By 11 a.m. the calls started. Derek called me 16 times in one day. I sat and watched the name flash on my phone again and again. A name I had once loved so fiercely it nearly broke me. A name that now brought nothing but quiet. I didn't answer. Not the first time, not the third, not the one at midnight. He never left a message. Just rang and rang, like someone realizing far too late that the door they used to walk through without knocking was now locked. The next morning the email arrived. Subject, I'm sorry, Mom. But at least let us keep the garden. I opened it, Not because I expected anything meaningful, but because I was curious. I wanted to see how he'd word it. I wondered if he'd even realize what had really been lost. Mom. I don't even know where to start. Tanya and I got the letter from the lawyer this morning, and honestly, I didn't think you'd go through with it. Maybe we handled things badly at the airport. Maybe we hurt you more than we realized. Tanya says it wasn't supposed to feel like abandonment. She thought you might want to stay longer, that you needed space. I know that doesn't make it right, but Mom, this is serious. You've removed us from everything, the house, the savings, the land. Even the joint account we used for the kids' school fees has been frozen. I'm not saying we didn't mess up, but you've cut us out completely, after all the years we spent together. At least let us keep the land behind the house. The garden. The kids helped plant it. Means something. We're not perfect, but we're still your family. Can we please talk? Just one call. Just 5 minutes. Derek asterisk. I read it once. Then again. Then I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. We didn't think you'd actually go through with it. That line told me everything. They didn't think I had it in me. They assumed I was too old, too tired, too desperate to be included. They thought I'd bark but never bite. Cry but never walk away. They confused gentleness with weakness. But they were wrong. And now they were stunned that the same woman who once sewed their buttons and packed their lunches had found the strength to erase them from her future. And I had. And I would not undo it. Because it wasn't just about being left at an airport. They had left me behind long before that. They chose comfort over care. Convenience over compassion. Performance over presence. And now they wanted the garden. The one they never asked me to help with. The one Tanya always called her sacred space online, but never once mentioned my name. Well, they could keep it in memory. But not in reality. Because it no longer belonged to them. The land was now in the hands of Elder Haven, whose regional director had already visited the site and proposed turning it into a therapeutic horticulture program for older women with memory loss. My land. My choice. My legacy. That afternoon I walked to the little library at Willow Grove. I pulled a book of poetry off the shelf. I wasn't reading it, I just needed the weight of something honest in my hands. Helen, sharp-tongued, soft-hearted Helen, slid into the armchair beside me. You've got that look again, she said. What look? I asked. The one people wear after they've just told the world exactly who they are. I smiled. Maybe I have. He grinned. Good. That world needed to hear it. I looked back down at the email. I reread the final line. Just 5 minutes. I thought about replying. One line. Something short. Something true. But instead I powered off the phone. Then I picked up my pen, opened my journal and wrote. Some things are inherited. Others are earned. And some, like peace, are built from the ground up. Let them wonder. Let them rage. Let them miss the sound of my voice when birthdays come and go. Let them feel the space I once filled, now quiet. Because I'm here now, surrounded by people who don't expect me to fund their comfort in exchange for their absence. I'm surrounded by names I chose. Not the ones who used to belong, but the ones who still see me. I don't owe anyone a conversation. I already gave them something better. A clear goodbye and a door that no longer opens. Some days now I forget what that sharp silence used to sound like. The kind that filled the house after Jake passed, after the casseroles stopped arriving, after my own son stopped checking in to ask how I was holding up. The silence at Willow Grove is different. Soft. It hums. It waits for you. It welcomes your memories. It doesn't scold you for needing rest. My mornings are spent with the book club. 6 women and 1 quiet man who always brings crossword puzzles to share. We argue over plot twists, laugh too loudly at the wrong scenes, and sip tea with names we can't pronounce. We show up for each other. That's all it takes. In the afternoons I take gentle yoga in the courtyard. My balance isn't what it used to be, but no one here cares. The instructor always says, "You're stronger than you think." And you know what? For the first time in my life, I believe her. I've picked up painting again after all these years. I gave it up decades ago when Derek was small, when Jake worked late. My brushstrokes are messy. My colors too bold. But when I step back and see something I made just for myself, my heart swells. One evening, while sorting through the art supplies in the community room, Ruth, one of the women from class, looked over at me and asked softly, "Do you ever regret it?" She didn't say what it was. He didn't have to. We all knew. I met her gaze and said, "I only regret not doing it sooner." She nodded once. No more questions. Subscribe to The Voice Inside today. Because when a grandma finally tells her story, the whole world listens.